organized. Let's bow our heads. Father, help us to see the importance of the Dead Sea Scrolls, Lord, and even more important, the book of Daniel, and how you protected both of these things for thousands of years. And we pray that you'll be able to teach us today, and bless all these people here today, that they can also share this with others. In Jesus' name. Okay, well, my name is Roger Clawson, and I live in Chilliwack. And I'm also a student. I'm finishing my degree in geology at Loma Linda University.
He's also an orthodontist.
Right. Never orthodontist. Well, just, I'll give you a little brief story, not to spend too much time on it, but I grew up in San Francisco, and of course I was totally bathed in evolution for many years. And but anyhow, some things happened to me, and I ended up at Pacific Union College, and I was introduced with some people like Dr. Earl Clawson and Dr. Paul Lucan, who's deceased now. These people became good friends of mine because they were able to answer questions that I had about creation and evolution. And my mother was a staunch creationist, and she tried to help me as much as she could when I was in high school. But, nobody believes God. When public high school in San Francisco is all evolution based. But I did learn a lot about evolution, and but God led me to people to teach me about the other side, the other way of looking at things, the other way of looking at the Bible. And my mother was a real Bible student. That really helped me. So anyway, today I'm talking about the Dead Sea Scrolls and the importance of the book of Daniel, and how the scrolls in the book of Daniel have information that we need to know. And
Is it working?
yeah, it's working. So this is our outline today. And I think it's about 45, 50 minutes long. Usually somebody tells me to quit, and then I quit. So, Dan's good at that, so she'll go like this.
He comes by it honestly for a month.
The Dead Sea Scrolls, as you know, is in the Dead Sea area. And they're in what's called the Qumran Caves. And these caves have protected the Dead Sea Scrolls for 2,500 years, roughly 2,500 years. And they have withstood major challenges that we're going to talk about first. That's the first topic. Then we're going to talk about what are the Dead Sea Scrolls, what are they, and when were they written and by whom? And was the book of Daniel written as a prophetic scroll by the author Daniel? We'll talk about that. Because right now, the world is saying no, it's not prophetic, it's history. We're going to talk about that. And we're going to, if I can make it work, we're going to show a little video clip on 10 archaeological discoveries that show strong evidence for the Bible and the book of Daniel being a realistic thing, a real thing. And why are the Dead Sea Scrolls important? Talk about that. And what is the recent research using AI and carbon-14 dating? I'm talking about when the Dead Sea Scrolls were actually written. And then we'll have a summary. And we'll open it up for questions. If you have a comment or a question, this is not like a sermon. This is kind of like a lecture. So, but raise your hand though. Don't just talk out like my brother Grant. All right. First of all, a little introduction to this planet, because this gets involved, believe it or not, with Dead Sea Scrolls. The Earth's surface is divided into 13 plates, and then there's about 57 smaller plates. Did you guys know that?
No.
Okay.
Some.
Wow, I got some really good information here for you. Okay. And you can see the continent. Here's South America. Here's Africa. Here's the United States. Here's Canada up here. You know the Juan de Fuca subduction zone? You've heard of that?
Yep.
That's off our coast. And by the way, northern British Columbia has a rift. It's rifting away, but that's the geology of deep sea. We're not going to get into that today. But what we're going to be talking about is where these two little arrows are right here. There's one arrow pointing down here and one pointing up. We're going to be talking about the African plate and how it interacts with the Arabian plate right here where the Dead Sea Scrolls are. So here we are, looking at the Dead Sea. And if you look at the Dead Sea, you'll notice it's long and narrow. This is called a pull apart basin. It's 430 meters below sea level, so it's the lowest on the continental crust of the earth. This is the lowest spot on Earth. Its depth is 304 meters. You have the African plate moving this way. You have the Arabian plate moving this way. This is one of the most seismic areas in the world. And guess where God hid the... Yes?
Just going back to the depth, is the 300, it's 304 meters deep. Does the 430 go to the top level of the sea is at 430 meters below sea level, or the bottom?
So the top of the water is 430, yeah. And then the depth is 304. Good question.
Okay.
She's listening, I like that. Yeah, that's good.
Good question.
And then north, you can see the north is pointing this way. So this is kind of angled so you can, see this a little easier. But here's the amazing thing to me, is God put those scrolls and hit them right smack dab on the transform fault. This is called a transform fault, by the way, because it's shifting like this, just like the San Andreas fault down in California. It's a transform fault. But the caves, if I push this button the wrong way, everything goes crazy. There we go. So the caves are right on the fault line. Now, why is that a big deal? Well, let me show you. You have Jerusalem. I didn't realize this, but Jerusalem is not that far from the Qumran caves. It's only 42 kilometers. A good runner could run that in a day. Try out a marathon, right? And then, of course, you have Tel Aviv up here, Mediterranean. And then you can tell there's lots of salt here. This is one of the saltiest areas in the world, if not the saltiest. We just had a war over on the Gaza Strip. And sometimes knowing a little geology is important. Were they fighting over just land?
No.
No, because off the coast there's huge deposit underground, under a salt deposit of natural gas. Trillions. Over a trillion, I don't know how they measure it. But
Probably cubic meters.
Cubic meters?
Probably.
Yeah. And there's also oil there as well. And this just shows you what's going on here. But I find it interesting because it's, right off the coast of the Gaza, here's Gaza. And you have what they call Leviathan. This is where the main source of the gas and oil are. And so it puts a different twist on this area, what's going on, the interest here. The average dimensions of there's a salt deposit. You know, you've heard about Sodom and Gomorrah and the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. And the Bible is very clear about salt there. Very clear. Well, there's a tremendous amount of salt underneath southern Israel. And what happens is when you have these layers of salt, and this particular layer is over 1 kilometer thick of salt. Up to, in some areas, 5 kilometers thick of salt. And they're called salt divers. I think I pronounced that right. Salt divers or divers are in the Dead Sea Basin, and then they're also extending out into the Mediterranean, which has a huge salt deposit under it. I haven't given you guys a talk on these salt deposits, but maybe if I come back, if Grant, you guys want me back, I'll give you a talk on it. Yeah, they're incredible. The salt deposits are incredible and how it relates to the flood, the Genesis flood. The average dimensions of what's called the Lyson diaper, according to our interpretation of the salt dome and seismic profiles, is about 13 kilometers by 10 kilometers and an average thickness of 6 kilometers. These dimensions give a salt volume of 780 cubic kilometers of salt. And notice the word Sodom here. The Sodom diaper has only 1/10 of the salt volume of the Lysan. So the Lysan is even larger than that. So, and this is all under the Dead Sea and southern Israel and out into the Mediterranean. And then to show evidence for that, these are seismic and computerized projections of what is underneath the ground. And so these are travel times, how many seconds down, and then they have the outline of these huge salt deposits under the surface of the earth, which is up here. Actually, I think the surface is a little lower than that. I'd have to study the surface on that. But notice this is the scale of 1 to 4 kilometers. So this is pretty large. And then these salt diapers in this area form this way. You have pressure from the ground pushing down on the salt, and then it gets forced out like this. And notice oil here. Wherever you have these large salt diapers in the earth, that's where you find the most oil. Because what happens is the salt acts like a cap rock, and it doesn't allow the oil to migrate up through the rock. It holds it right there because oil is light and it can travel up through rocks. And then it collects in the edges of these salt domes. Well, I can tell you some stories about other ones in Europe, but we don't have time. And so this is where these two domes are, right here, and right underneath the Dead Sea. And the caves are right here. Now the other thing that's going on is, and I don't know if they started this already, but they want to put in a pipeline that goes from parts of the Red Sea, extension of the Red Sea, up to pump water back up into here, because they're losing 1 meter of water every year. So the Dead Sea is getting more and more dead. Now here's a picture of the caves. And what's going on around them? What is happening here? Erosion, yes. But the caves are hanging in there. This amazed me because erosion, when you see this type of sediment, now mind you, there's not a lot of rain there, but still, with earthquakes, you would expect a lot of this to be gone, you know. So the cave sediments are mainly marl, that's clay and calcium carbonate. So they kind of bind, it's a binding. And gypsum that goes along with the salt, and sandstone, and there are frequent earthquakes, and many that were up to 7.8, which is a huge earthquake. And then we talked about the transformed fall. Now, what you find there are sediments called seismites.
How cool.
And seismites are caused by sediments that are normally horizontal, like this. The law of horizontality in geology is disrupted by the earthquake. Now, these are a bit soft when they're formed, but look at this one. Look how much the earth had to move to form that. And down below the horizontality. So it was horizontal, but when this layer was laid down, and it was a little bit soft probably. And here's another thing too, is when you have a lot of salt or gypsum mixed in with the sediment, it makes it more fluid and the sediment can move easier. Now the other interesting thing is in the Bible it talks about a large earthquake with the death of Christ. And you notice in Matthew 27, the Bible says that Christ's death rocks were split. It's just showing that it was a very intense earthquake. And then Matthew 28 talks about another earthquake at the resurrection of Christ. And they think they've actually found those actual earthquake sediments, the seismites for that. And a lot of this was documented, these earthquakes were documented by Josephus, when he was the historian Josephus. And here's another wild one, which you can see. In order for this to happen, you have to have a pretty large earthquake. And then you also have a fault line going down through here. So, you know, these sediments here used to line up more with these up here. You can see how the earth has been rattled quite a bit. And then you look at the caves, you see all this erosion. Look back here, there's slumping. See the slumping right here? Where the sediments just through earthquakes just drop. How come that these are still here? And so today, students are going up there and they're looking for more of these, they're looking for more of the scrolls. But what amazes me is that I believe an angel protected those caves for many, many years. Let me just go back a second. You know, something's wrong with this. It's missing. There we go. Okay. So anyhow, what I'm thinking is that God had to protect this. He had to protect it also from the Romans coming through. The Romans destroyed the Essene civilization at Qumran. They wiped out everything. Why did one of them crawl up here in the cave and look to see if there was anything stashed in there? You know, but they didn't. And you had World War I. There was actual skirmishes in this area during World War I. The caves were still protected. All these earthquakes. I mean, there were so many things that could have destroyed these scrolls, but they were protected. So, what is the importance of the Dead Sea Scrolls, and when were they found? The Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered in 1946, and then it took 10 years to get all of the scrolls back together. A shepherd boy found these scrolls, and then he sold them to Bedouins, and these Bedouins sold them to others. These scrolls went all over the world, and they went missing. And it took years. It's been 70 years now they've been studying these, trying to get them all back together again, and then to piece them together. It's taken a lot of time. It's very hard work, but extremely important. So, why are the Dead Sea Scrolls so important? It's because they show us that the Bible is the same Bible that we have today that Christ had. are the same writings. He had scrolls, we have the Bible. But it shows that the book, the Bible, and the writings in the Bible are the same because the scrolls line up with our present day Bible, which comes from the Codex, the Masoretic Codex. And they're the same. Now, another question that came into my mind is what happened in 1946? Why were these discovered in 1946? Why not 1846, you know? Well, when you study this, it was 6 months after the end of World War II. And I asked that question to people, and in fact, if I asked you, why do you think God waited until 1946 for these to be discovered by a veteran? Why do you think that's the case? What was going on in the world?
Well, World War II just ended.
World War II just ended, and what happened during World War II?
Industrialization?
Industrialization. There was more technology to study these, for one thing. But the Holocaust had just taken place, and we had, 7 million Jews were wiped out. The Jewish nation rejected God. So God's no longer with them. What God was saying here, what God was saying is, look, I want you to read these scrolls because they show that I'm still your God. I haven't forgotten. And it pointed them to the book of Daniel, which we'll talk about in just a second. Are you guys all with me, or are you?
Oh, yes. Yes.
So why are these scrolls important to us? Okay, before the Dead Sea Scroll discovery, the oldest texts that were used to make our modern copies of the Bible were the codexes. And the word codex just means binding. That means like a book. Okay? So you had these scrolls were written, copied, and then bound in these codex. And there's one, notice there are different places in the world. You have one in Leningrad, you have, where's the other one?
Aleppo?
Cairo?
Yeah.
Cairo, different places have these Masoretic Hebrew texts. And these were written 1895 AD, okay? So, 108 AD. So the reason why the Dead Sea Scrolls are so valuable is because now it puts it 300, maybe 300 years before the birth of Christ. So these Dead Sea Scrolls are very valuable. And, yeah, like I mentioned before, the scriptures of the Old Testament that Jesus quoted were from the same scriptures that we have today. This is very important, especially all the skeptics out there. These also were written on different skins. They were written on goat skin. They were written on even cow skins. And also copper. They used copper, and some of the scrolls are on copper. And there's a recent study that just came out where they did DNA tests on these skins of the Dead Sea Scrolls. And it actually verifies the text even more. What it shows is that there were other areas where they were bringing these scrolls. Just before the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70, a lot of scholars in Israel knew that these were going to be wiped out. So a lot of them ended up in the Qumran area, the scrolls, to protect them.
Sorry, I'm interrupting, but
No, that's good.
So-
you raised your hand.
so this area of Israel, Masada occupied that area, just above the Dead Sea.
Yes.
And
Yes.
Masada was the Jewish stronghold. And there was a Roman encampment there for literally years, a large contingent of Roman legions trying to figure out how they were going to conquer Masada.
Yes.
Eventually, as the story goes, the Romans were scratching their heads for a while. They eventually went right round the back of Masada and built a massive ramp, quite an engineering feat. What's curious,
So they did wipe the. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
So what's curious to me is that you showed that shot of where we talked about erosion, and the caves weren't eroded. It was like they were being protected.
Yes.
And so whilst this the legions of Roman soldiers there, they didn't think to go in these caves. Like it's like, didn't they think maybe it's an escape route for the Jews? Maybe it's a way we can get in? It's just kind of mystifying to me as you talk, when you see that, you know, that the weather didn't even destroy them, but now you have these Romans that were camped out for years and years and years who didn't even go in. What's driving that?
They were trying to wipe out the Jewish civilization.
Yeah.
And one of the best ways they could have done it was to wipe out the Dead Sea Scrolls, because that was a whole record of the records of the civilization.
But they didn't they didn't even think about it or figure it out. Were they being protected then, the Dead Sea Scrolls?
Like I said, I think an angel was watching over these caves.
Nobody ever knew they were even there.
You know,
Well, they
God
never
could put
even
the
looked.
blinders on, but a little shepherd boy was able to crawl into the cave.
Yeah.
You see, that's
Yeah, but didn't he throw a rock
he
in
threw a
it?
rock because he thought a goat was in there, when it was goats, and he heard a thud. Yes.
It's also actually curious to me that the scrolls were discovered in 1946. The modern state of Israel was declared in 48.
Was it?
Yes.
48. Good point.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So yeah, the Jewish nation made a lot of mistakes, but it's like we were talking in Sabbath school. It doesn't matter how many mistakes or how much you reject God, He still wants you to know that He's still our Father.
A question with the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Yep.
We're hearing lots these days about all of the other books of the Bible that haven't been put into the Bible. Were they part of the Dead Sea Scrolls, or are they from something else?
They weren't part of. Well, yes, there were some, like the Book of Enoch, for example, is in the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Okay.
But they were very careful what books they put in the canon, what they call the canon.
Right.
And what's interesting is the Jews back then, or the Hebrews back then, considered Daniel one of the main canon books. Why is it not today? We'll talk about that. But that's a good point. But when you read the Book of Enoch and you read some of these other books, you go, well, I know now why they didn't put it in, because they're kind of weird.
Yeah. So
That's my interpretation. That I think they did a good job being careful what they put in the Bible, the scrolls.
I think God had a hand in that too.
I think so too. Because all the books, they all work together. So, you've heard of Isaac Newton. Isaac Newton was probably one of the smartest guys that ever lived on this planet. He discovered the laws of motion, of gravity. He invented calculus so he could figure out these things. I mean, the guy was a genius. But you know, he spent more time studying the Bible than he did his actual scientific work. And he didn't confuse religion with science. He combined the two. And that's what made him such a great scientist. Daniel was, and this is what Newton writes, he says, Daniel was in the greatest credit amongst the Jews until the reign of the Roman Emperor Hadrian. To reject his prophecies, that's the book of Daniel prophecy, to reject his prophecies is to reject the Christian religion. For this religion is founded upon his prophecy concerning the Messiah. And all of you should know that prophecy absolutely, and be able to explain it to somebody. 490-year prophecy. And it's right here. We'll go over it again. This date, 457, is something you need to ingrain in your brain, because this is the prophecy where it's we call it the 70-week prophecy of Daniel 9:24. 7 times 70 is 490 years. But when you take this date and you do the math, it comes out exactly to spring of AD 31. And I believe it actually is accurate to the exact hour. And it was 490 years prophetic before it happened. And Christ died at exactly the Passover, just when they were ready to strike the lamb in the temple. That's when Christ died. He said, "It's finished." Boom, right when he said it would happen. But you need to study this out. Just don't take my word for it. And then it also is part of our strong belief. The 2300-day prophecy, or 2300-year prophecy, starts at 457, and it takes you over to 1844, which our church calls, and others call, the time of the end. So we are, according to the book of Daniel, we're living in the time of the end. Makes you think. So these prophecies were extremely important for the Jewish nation. And how many scrolls, let me ask you a question. What is the most scrolls, or the books of, what are the most common books or scrolls in the Dead Sea Scroll collection? Which scroll is the most common?
I guess Daniel.
Yeah, well, a lot of people say Isaiah is the most common.
Okay.
The book of Daniel, they found 8 scrolls in the Dead Sea, of the book of Daniel. And when you find 8 scrolls, that means that the people who wrote those scrolls were afraid it might get lost, so they made more copies. Because Daniel was a very important person and well respected in early Judaism, amongst the Hebrews. And then it got lost. We'll explain that later, why it got lost. Now, just recently, this paper just came out June 2025. This is recent stuff. What they've done is they have, the museum, in Tel Aviv has made a program called Enoch. And the program basically helps them to interpret the actual writing style of the Dead Sea Scrolls. So up here it just says, linguistic evidence. The Hebrew and Aramaic used in Daniel predates the 2nd century BC, supporting the argument that Daniel was written during the 6th century BC, which is around 535. So this is very important, because there's, every time period has people that write a little differently, and their styles change. So this is strong evidence that the Bible was written by people in that time. And then the Essenes and ancient Jews considered Daniel's scrolls canonical. In other words, they were sacred and therefore written in the 6th century by Daniel. Okay? Even Jesus says that the book was written by Daniel. And I think I believe what Jesus says. Okay, now what about radiocarbon dating? Well, they used radiocarbon dating to date these. And radiocarbon dating can be accurate to a certain year, and then it gets more and more iffy. But what they had to do is calibrate the radiocarbon. Radiocarbon dating has to be recalibrated constantly to get accurate dates. And even then, there's problems with it. But the public doesn't hear that. Okay, and so they were dating the parchment of the actual scrolls, and they were able to, and I like this, they were able to coordinate this with the texts. And it says, using this data, the researchers trained a date prediction model named Enoch. They employed BINET, a deep neural network previously developed in-house to detect ink trace patterns in digitized manuscripts. So it was pretty amazing what they did. And here's what they found. Here's the data. The red is where they thought when the scroll was written. This is when they thought, for example, this scroll. This is a Daniel scroll right here, but it's a scroll that has a lot of prophecy in it. And here's what they thought the date was, but the program and carbon 14 put it up here, and one of them even up to 300. So what that does is it shows that it was not written as history. It was written probably by somebody very close to the time of Daniel. Okay, do you want to see this more? I want to go to the next step.
When you say written by, you mean the scribe that was rewriting it, copying it?
Yeah, well, the scribes wrote it. Yeah, the
They were
scribes.
copying it closer to the time.
Yeah, but it was written much earlier than the 2nd century AD. Okay. Now here's something interesting too about the life of these scrolls. The life of a scroll depends on its handling and storage, but it can be in use by a community for several hundred years. Some Torah scrolls still in use in synagogues today are over 500 years old. The Isaiah scroll from the Dead Sea caves has been dated to around 200 BC. Isaiah wrote his original scroll around 700 BC and may have been in use up until around 200 BC. This means that it is possible for the Isaiah scroll from the Dead Sea caves to be a copy made directly from Isaiah's original scroll. The Isaiah scroll, as well as many other scrolls and fragments from the Dead Sea, are currently stored and on display in Jerusalem. Sorry, not Tel Aviv, they're in Jerusalem at the Shrine of the Book. Have any of you ever been there?
Have you?
No, but I'd really like to go. I guess these scrolls were in LA for a while.
Oh, wow.
I think the Isaiah scroll was. So what are the main evidences then of the book of Daniel being written in 535? We can kind of go through these real quick. The dating of the book of Daniel is crucial because it influences whether the text is viewed as predictive prophecy or simply as historical narrative. The 6th century BC date of 535 supports its authenticity and prophetic reputation. Author uses the first person I and me. 2nd century date questions its prophetic nature and interpretation. If you go on your phones right now and you look up when was the book of Daniel written, or the prophetic book, when you write, sorry, it has to be the biblical book of Daniel. AI will tell you it was written in the 2nd century. But if you go and read, and you know how you can push and get more info, it starts to show the evidence that it was written in the 6th century. But to start with, it says 2nd century, and I don't like that. The 8 manuscripts found among the Dead Sea Scrolls are very close to the Masoretic text, which is the basis for most modern translations of the Bible, the Old Testament. This is significant because we basically have the same writings that Jesus used 2,000 years ago during his ministry. This is amazing. 2,000 years, we still have the same Bible.
Sorry, another question. We all know that some of us can have a Bible, and the Bible, reading the Bible and using the Bible, it can be kind of time for a new Bible in 5 years. How does this happen? I mean, you say that some of the scrolls were in use for 500 years. I
Yes.
mean, it's kind of what? Like, how's that even possible? Not to mention, this is one of the driest places on earth, the Judean desert. And we're in an open cave with very little humidity. How on earth did they survive? I mean, it's incomprehensible, right?
Yeah, and they weren't put in a big steel safe.
Exactly.
In fact, the way they packed these things, it was done in haste. You could tell it was done in haste. They were just put in jars.
But the jars were sealed, were they not?
Some were and some were not.
Plant them and they'll grow.
That's right, yeah, you're right. Yeah, that didn't, but the earthquakes, that really shakes me up. Literally.
Yeah, they're amazing.
I mean, a 7.8 earthquake, I'm telling you, this building here would be gone. You know? It would be history. Look what happened in Venezuela.
Yeah.
And you know, in talking about that just briefly, I was so sad that that happened. But Venezuelan people have been through a lot. And then you see these high rises, 16-story high rises built right on a fault line. I mean, what were they thinking? You know?
They probably didn't know.
You know, Loma Linda University just built a huge hospital. And it has more steel in it than any other building for its size in California. It has twice the steel of the Eiffel Tower in France, in that building. And I had a tour. I got to go down in the basement and look at what they did. And it's amazing how that building, it's all designed so that it moves, it rolls like this. It can pivot if there's an earthquake. Because there is a fault line right near the San Andreas there that could become real bad someday. So they were smart to do that, but it was very costly. But if you ever go down to that area, it's worth a tour to go in there. So it's a beautiful building. Okay, then we'll kind of move forward here. We talked about the linguistic evidence. The 8 scrolls, we talked about that. And then Daniel, when he wrote, he was very clear that he was writing this book. Let me go forward here. Daniel lived almost 600 years before Christ, and Jesus referred to him as Daniel the prophet. Daniel was written over 2,500 years ago, and Revelation about 1,900 years ago. And Daniel told King Nebuchadnezzar, God has made known to the king what will come to pass after this. The dream is certain, and its interpretation is sure. And Daniel then writes, at the same time, at the time of the end, in the latter days, blah, 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 are statements confirming that these two books contain knowledge of future events that concern humanity and empires. These books, these Dead Sea Scrolls are so important, and that's why they are with us today. And Daniel kept records of his dreams and visions. He passed through, it says, as visions passed through his mind, as he laid in his bed, he wrote down the substance of his dreams. And he expresses his distress over the visions and the importance of the content of the records. Now, we have a little video clip here, and I don't know if we have time to get into this, but I would encourage you to maybe take a note of this, and tonight, look this up on the internet. This is really good. This is a very short little video clip on the 10 archaeological discoveries that prove that the book of Daniel was written by Daniel at time. Very good. And then there's another one. It's called Daniel the Prophet. It's made by the same outfit. And it's 26 minutes long, and it explains in more detail each one. So it's something you can look at, sometime when you got the time. But it's very good. So in conclusion, what are the historical implications of the dating of the book of Daniel? We've already gone through these, but we'll just go through them again because it's good to go through things more than once. The dating of the book of Daniel has significant historical implications as it influences the credibility of its prophecies and the integrity of the Bible scriptures. Jesus had the same scriptures that we have today. Dated to the 6th century BC, around 535 BC, it supports the view of divine inspiration and accurate prophecy. This is one reason why I'm a Christian today, is because of this book. And for me to hear somebody say it was history, I take offense to that. Recent research using AI and carbon-14 dating confirmed that the scrolls are much older than previously thought. Therefore, Daniel was written in the 6th century by Daniel and confirmed by Jesus. And when you read the book, you can tell it was written by somebody who was right there, not 400 years later. And then archaeological evidence points to Daniel as being present under these 6 kings. So you study about the Cyrus cylinder. Have you ever heard of the Cyrus cylinder?
Mm-hmm.
So it shows exactly what Cyrus was going to allow the Jews to do. He allowed them to go back to Israel or to Jerusalem and rebuild the temple. But then, as you go through Darius all the way up to Artaxerxes finally let them go back and build the whole city so that they could become a nation. That was all prophesied.
Wasn't Cyrus, his name literally prophesied?
So
I
in the
believe
book,
150 years before he was born or something
Yes.
like that. Or his name, he was told who the king's name was.
so what happened was when Cyrus invaded Babylon and he took it without a fight. Remember the story in the Bible?
Yeah.
He just walked in there. The gates were open to him. They didn't close the gates on the Tigris River. And the Bible prophesied that in Isaiah. It says, I will open up gates to my prophet Cyrus. So his name is written about 200 years before he was born. And so what happened was Cyrus, the priests, the Jewish priests, or the Hebrew priests in Babylon, after Cyrus came in and took the city, they said, we knew that you were coming. And here's why. And they showed them the scroll with his name on it. And don't tell me that wouldn't influence Cyrus. So Cyrus carried out what God, because God called him his anointed, my servant.
Yeah.
And incredible how God led these people. Okay, I think that's it.
The thing to remember is that he'll lead us exactly like he led them,
Yes,
if we let him.
exactly. Above all, you must realize that no prophecy in Scripture ever came from the prophet's own understanding or from human initiative. Those prophets were moved by the Holy Spirit and they spoke from God. Oh, I got to show you this. This is cool. Yeah, I got to put a little geology at the end. Look at this cave, and you'll notice there's a guy spelunking right here.
Oh, wow.
What do you think this is? Any ideas?
So,
Salt, solid salt.
I
So
can read.
if the spelunker was able to lick the side, it would be salty. Remember, the Bible talks about Mount Sodom, or talks about Sodom and Gomorrah. Sodom means salt. This guy is spelunking down through one of these diapers, and this thing goes way, way down. But there's a ledge down here where they can get off. You can go over there and do this if you pay for it. So this particular spelunk is 200 feet. The solid salt. And what's interesting is not too far from here is a lot of sulfur. And you've heard of brimstone. The Bible talks about brimstone and fire coming down from heaven, raining down fire. If you take these rocks and you light them, they catch on fire. And the other thing that's really
Just a
interesting
minute,
to
you
me.
mean this?
No, not salt,
Oh,
So
the
this
sulfur.
is salt,
brimstone.
but near here there's also sulfur deposits
Oh,
that have these rocks. You can light them on fire, and they smell terrible because they're sulfur, you know. But everything that the Bible says about Sodom and Gomorrah fits perfectly with what the geology shows. Earthquakes, salt deposits, massive salt deposits, brimstone, and explosions. When you have this much salt under the earth, like I mentioned, you collect a lot of oil under it, but there's something else you collect, and that's hydrogen gas. And hydrogen gas can be set off by an earthquake because of the friction of the rocks. There's a lot of iron in those rocks, you can get sparks. So I can just imagine what happened to Sodom and Gomorrah. And you know, you hear about Lot's wife turning to a pillar of salt. What happened to her? She tarried long enough where she didn't get out of the explosive, all this white coming down, all this salt. Have you ever gone skiing or snowboarding and gotten in a whiteout?
Mhm.
You don't know what's up. You don't know if you're going down or up. You're totally disoriented. You don't know where you are. And I think that's what happened to her. She hung out in a spot too long, and she got into that rain, all that salt coming down.
Goes to show you the easy to do it.
Okay, so we are officially over. But I could keep going. But I think we should stop. And if you want to leave or what, I don't know how this works. Is this like the end of the service or?
Yeah, would you just close with prayer for us?
Yes, let's do that. Thank you. Dear Father, thank you so much for these scrolls that you saved for us in our time. And thank you for the book of Daniel. Help us to read this book in such a way that we can teach it to others. And I pray for all these people here that they will be able to show this to other people, especially our young people. Show them that they can read their Bible and know that this was from you and preserved for thousands of years for us today. And it's as pertinent for us today as back then. And thank you for your guiding and protection, and thank you for this group. May the Holy Spirit continue to bless this church in Jesus' name.
So Roger, I was reading a bit, I hear some things on the boat, the ark. We'll probably hear about that tonight some.
Okay.
I've recently, I read somebody's found the ark again or something. Have you read that?
Well, ever since I was a kid, they've been looking for the ark, and there's story after story. Here's the thing.
What I wanted to hear.
Yeah. No, well, first of all, I mean, Loma Linda just, you've heard of Geoscience Research Institute from Loma Linda? It's funded by the General Conference. And I know a lot of the guys there. In fact, my major professor is one who went up to look for wood for Noah's Ark. And they had a real bad experience over there. Getting a permit. They were supposed to have a permit, they paid for it, and then it was declined, and then the Turkish government allowed them then to go, but the weather was so bad they had to turn back. So, you spend thousands of dollars and didn't get anywhere. But the pictures you've seen from space of you've seen like hulls of ships from space, what that is an anticline that's been eroded. So it's a geologic formation.
What's an anticline?
Well, an anticline is basically like a mountain or hill, and then it's valley, because usually when you have mountains, you have valleys, right? The valley is called a syncline. So you have synclines and anticlines. But when you have a mountain or an anticline where you have the sediments that curve up like this, okay, because they've been uplifted, what happens is the top starts to erode away, and it exposes those sediments going down into the rock. And it looks like the hull of a ship. So they should talk to geologists before they do all this. But the other thing too is, like we were talking about planking, they thought that there was planking. It was actually sedimentary rock. They weren't there on site. They were using binoculars to look at it. Now, I'm not saying that it hasn't been discovered. I know my mother believes for sure that there's pieces of wood from it, and maybe there are, but there's no solid evidence yet. Let's say that. But you know something? You don't need the ark to show the flood. I'm going to present tonight strong evidence that there was a massive happening in the earth about the time of what I think was the end of the flood, which is right at the death of the dinosaurs. So tonight we're going to talk about that. And it gets exciting, especially with the new discoveries of what they've been finding about the inside of the Earth. So we're going to talk about how the mantle interacts with the crust of the Earth and how we could have had a massive flood. So I'm presenting, anything I present tonight has been peer-reviewed. They're all scientific papers. And then I'll throw my ideas. Yeah. Okay, so the other thing too is Jericho is right on the fault line.
Jericho what?
Jericho is right on the African part of the transform fault. Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it gets even more interesting. Every time I give this talk, somebody asks me about carbon-14 because carbon-14. You want to talk about this now that we've put? You can leave if you want, but if you want me to, I'll talk about this real briefly.
This back on.
What's that?
Talk about this and everybody else can leave.
Okay.
Whoever wants to leave,
Okay.
needs to leave.
So carbon-14 is you have what's called helium. You have helium atoms up in our atmosphere. Carbon-14 is completely dependent upon the atmosphere of the Earth. And carbon-14 can only be used in things that have been alive. You can't use it for dating rocks. Only carbon. You gotta have carbon to dig. We like wood, bones, seashells, which are very controversial. These things. So what happens is you have cosmic bombardment from the sun and all these cosmic rays that come into our atmosphere by there's particles going through us all the time. Right now, particles are going through our bodies. But when these interact with helium, what happens is you knock out a nucleus and you get nitrogen-14. This is all, isotope stuff. Then the nitrogen-14 gets hit and knocks out a protein and you get carbon-14. So radioactive carbon-14 is present in all living things. So we have carbon-14 in our bodies because the carbon-14 hooks on to CO2 and we breathe that CO2 in. So all living things on Earth have carbon-14 in them, but very, very small amounts.
How do they come up with these millions and millions of billions of years?
Well, that comes with zircon dating and argon dating and uranium lead. But this is carbon-14 is only quote unquote accurate to 50,000 years, or 54,000 years. Like because of the half-life being about 5,200 years is the half-life of it. So look, I mean, it gets crazy, the whole idea behind it, but I've been to the lab in Arizona where they dated the famous Jack Hill's zircons. And I was able to talk to one of the top guys there. Tonight I'll tell you a little bit about that. Bake the hooks, you guys come. Okay, but anyhow, you have the carbon-14. I think that carbon-14 can be used as a tool because it can be used to tell you which is older. This particular bone that's in this sediment, or this bone down here that's in this sediment. You can look at it and you can see which one happened first. Like a sequence of geology. But to put an actual date on it is, there's a lot of assumptions. And so, let's go ahead here. Oops, I don't have it on this program. Okay, I didn't think I was going to talk much about this.
worries.
But the thing is that one thing that you don't hear about in the textbooks that I think is very significant for Christians to realize is the magnetic fields of our Earth make a huge difference in how carbon-14 is dated. Carbon-14, we talked about how it goes out to 50,000 years, you know, the half-lives. But here's what they discovered back in the 1970s. I have a paper from the British journal Nature where a scientist is saying that when we write the formula for carbon-14 decay, you have to put an M at the bottom of and you draw a line and you divide what your results are by the magnetic field at that particular time. Because if you have a really strong magnetic field around the Earth, it protects the Earth more from radiation from the sun, right? And I believe that, in fact, I have evidence for it, that the magnetic fields have weakened from what they used to be. And so what they've done is they've studied rocks. In fact, they've used like metamorphic type rocks and igneous rocks, and they do what's called paleomagnetic measurements, where they figure out how strong the magnetic field is in that rock. And then they go back and they dig up these older rocks, like the cratonic rocks, and which are the oldest rocks on Earth, I believe. Those are the rocks that would have been lifted up when God said, let the dry land appear, which was plate tectonics, by the way. The plate tectonics were taking place in the creation week. Okay. But anyway, these dates, sorry, I got off track on that, but the magnetic fields have weakened, and if you have a weak magnetic field, are you going to get an older date or a younger date on your sample?
Probably older.
You're going to get an older date because you've got more carbon-14 in it.
So what's the method of calibration? Because like anything, don't you have to take a given that you know how old something is, and then apply the formula to it to give you a calibration on your point of reference?
Yes.
So, because it seems, I mean, 50,000 years accurate to? It seems very unscientific.
Yeah, it is. I believe it is. My limited knowledge of it, I believe it's, from what I know, it's hit or miss. Here's something to think about. If you have a magnetic field, let's say it's 3 times stronger than it is today, which there are evidences for that in the rocks, like I told you, then your dates would be much older. But if it's really strong, your dates are going to be younger, much younger. If the magnetic fields are weak, your dates are going to be older by at least a factor of 3.
Oh.
So instead of 60,000 years, it might be 20,000 years, or even a lot younger. You know, because a lot of us here believe in the shorter Earth chronology. But the other thing too is if you do carbon-14 dating on, say, a group of people that lived a long time ago, but they were fishermen people. They lived on the coastline. And then you take at the same time you take and you do measurements on people that are maybe eating wild beef or wild deer, you know, or moose, but they're too far away from the ocean to get any fish. Which group is going to have older dates, if any? So what happens is the fish don't get as much carbon-14 in their systems as, say, a deer. Yeah, so they're going to date older. And they have to calibrate for that. And if you don't, your dates are going to be wrong.
I have a question on the magnetic fields.
Yeah.
I've been hearing lately about the idea that our magnetic fields are currently very weak, and that there is the possibility of the switch from the north to the south. Yeah, is that reasonable? Like that from a creationist point of view?
Yeah, we're going to talk about that tonight.
Are we? Okay, never mind. I'll be here tonight.
Yeah, because the problem with Dan's telling me to quit. Okay, maybe we should quit. But I think the point I'm trying to make here is that carbon-14 can be used as a tool, but you don't want to put too much emphasis on it, especially when you get past about 4,000 or 5,000 years. Once you start going into no man's land, I mean, they don't even use the atmosphere ratios of carbon-12 to carbon-14 in today's atmosphere. Our atmosphere is too polluted. They have to use the atmosphere that we had before 1950 because of all the plutonium that was injected up there with the nuclear tests up in our upper atmosphere, which was a terrible thing they did. Exploding plutonium up into our upper atmosphere. Anyway,
Okay, thank you.